Hi guys, I'm going to first talk about our lightweight division champion drive here in our 4-H show. Out of Class 1, I chose to lead off with our tag number 3002. Just a really nice, complete little goat, one that's still green and immature, but one you really have to appreciate the design that he offers, particularly to the front two-thirds of his skeleton. One that certainly showing some evidence of shape and muscle. You really have to appreciate that. And then when you study him at the ground, at the surface, he's one that's plenty stout in terms of his structure. I guess compared to the ideal, I'd like to lengthen him out in his hip just ever so slightly and maybe pick him up in his tail head. But I think an awful good goat that, could go on down the road and have a good future if that may be the case. Out of our Class 2, I chose the Paint Doe, tag number or entry out at 2854. I think it's just a rugged made individual that's stout at the ground. She's big footed. She's heavy bone, offers a tremendous amount of integrity in terms of her structure. She comes and goes. She's plenty wide. She's plenty open there. Really like the shape and the roundness to the center of her skeleton. Extra long bodied. You have to appreciate that about her. Ideally, maybe she's a little bit weaker in terms of her top line. Maybe not quite as attractive as through her shoulder as another goat or two in this drive, but one that you really have to appreciate the stoutness and the boldness that she offers. Out of our Class 3, or heaviest class in this division, I opted to go with goat 2469 ID number. The dark-headed weather is just really neat in terms of his balance and his eye appeal. I think he's one that's really good in terms of his symmetry. I like the squareness that he offers. He's one that's got some roundness to the center of his skeleton. You study him as he goes to the ground, and he offers plenty of base width and stoutness, a weather that's got plenty of shape and muscle packed in on top of him. I thought he was the logical place to go in this division drive, and so our tag number 2469 is going to be our champion. As we bring our second place out of that class, that was tag number 2961. Just a stout made goat that's pretty opened up to the center of his body. He's got some width and some stoutness to the center of his skeleton. And then still acceptable enough in his balance. Probably not as attractive and square and symmetrical as our champion, but I think he's the place that has to go follow in there for reserve. So our champion will be out of our heavy class, 2469, and our reserve will be second out of that class, 2961. Here in our middleweight division, the 4-H show, a nice pair of class winners, I think, that came out of each class and surfaced to select a champion out of. In the first class, I opted with tag number 2618. Just a neat individual that puts a lot of unique things together. That one is super powerful in terms of his build, one that is really stout at the ground, and he just carries that up into a great big rib cage. He's wide up on the top side of his skeleton and just has as much muscle packed in as possible. And to go with that, when you watch him go, he has a class advantage in there, and just in terms of width through the center of his hip from stifle to stifle, and maintains that as he goes to the ground in terms of base width. But the unique thing about him to have that, he's still very, very good in terms of his balance, and he's wedged up front, and one that you really like him in terms of his chest floor and how his shoulders laid in him. Out of that next class, I opted with the goat 2853. This is another one that's just really neat in terms of his look and his design. I think that one probably of this pair is maybe just a tick longer bodied. He may be a little more elevated at the point of his shoulder. Another one that you really appreciate in terms of his feet and legs, in terms of flexibility, and still stout and rugged and honest in his integrity in terms of structural power. As I change that one and compare him maybe back to our lighter weight winner there in our first class, one that probably gives up quite a bit in terms of mass and thickness in relation to that class 4 winner, but one that he's still shapely, just not near the mass and the overall power and product that we see in him. So in our middleweight division of the 4-H show, tag number 2618 will be our champion. Tag number 2853 will be our reserve. In our 4-H show in the heavy division, on our first class, or class 6, I opted to use goat 2299. I just think a complete kind of goat that surfaced in a class with a lot of differences and types and kinds. And it's another situation, I guess, where a person could just where you lay your priorities. For me, he's the product-oriented one of that class. That was very good on his feet and legs. He's bold to the center of his body. He has that advantage as he goes to the surface in terms of width. Sure, I'd like to change him just a nickel's worth in terms of his balance. He wants to get a little easier behind his blade. When you study him up through his front end, he gets a little bit more out there to his breastplate. But besides that, I think that one's fundamentally good on his feet and legs, and he's the most product-oriented and the most complete one out of that class. In our Class 7, I like the 2497 goat to lead off, and I think that one's a little bit different in terms of his design. That one balances extremely well. When that individual gets that one propped up, he squares up good, really good, and has the right angles and the right symmetry to his body. One that's made neat through his chest floor and his shoulder blade there. He's strong in his top line, and then good out of his hip. And then as you just study him in terms of muscle, he's got plenty of that packed on, a skeleton that fits together very fluidly and holds itself together on the go. And so, in our heavyweight division, I like the Class 7 goat of 2497 to be our champion. We bring the second place out of that class. That was tag number 2960. I think another goat that follows type and kind of our class winner or our champion in this division, just in terms of his likeness and build, one that really cuts out a neat silhouette as well. Extra good up through his front end and balances extremely well. Probably what separated that pair is I don't see this one being quite as bold to the center of his skeleton and up high just in terms of mass. But sure enough, one that's plenty acceptable in that area, and I think he's a logical place to be reserved. So our reserve will be second out of that Class 7, 2960. In selection for our Grand and Reserve Grand Champion in our 4H division, I thought we had three division winners and reserves that match up pretty well. I think that they're all very good in terms of their eye appeal and attractiveness. They balance extremely good, and it's just talking about blending from front to rear. I think all of them are plenty good on their feet and legs. I think when you just study them, to me, what separates them is I think there's some uniqueness in a couple of them there that they're just harder to build and harder to put together. So for champion, for me, I thought was an easy winner. I think this one is awful good. I think it's very, very competitive. I think it could be competitive in a lot of places, wherever this one will want to go. And that's going to be tag number 2618, our middleweight winner. I think that one is extra special and offers tremendous amount of quality. As we bring our reserve in that division and we compare him to the other two division winners, I talked about that one in the drive, the middleweight drive, is how that one is extra good in terms of his balance and his attractiveness, and still stout at the ground in terms of bone and foot. One that you really appreciate in terms of his flexibility, and his joints and his feet are all in the right direction, and yet still offers some muscle and some power. Probably not quite as expressive as our champion, but one that you really have to appreciate a lot about. In a close decision, I think it gets some give and take here, but the one that suits me second best is going to be our reserve out of our middleweight, 2853. In our FFA division, in the lightweight, I think we have a really nice pair of goats to select from. In our first class, I offered to lead off with goat tag number 2945. The solid red goat. I think that one is really extra good, and just in terms of his muscle and his shape, delineation that he offers. You could just see the product working down his top as you get in and study him from behind. He's extra wide there, and he's set wide through his pins. He's bold to the center of his body, and you have to appreciate that about him. Maybe compared to the ideal, I'd like to change him up front in terms of his way his shoulders laid in him. He wants to get a little bit out there for me. And times you may catch him and he's a little lower set there at the point of his shoulder. but an extra good one in terms of power and substance, and one that's very, very product oriented. Out of that second class was a goat 2959. Another goat that I think is maybe a little bit different in terms of his skeletal design. I think of this pair, he's the one that balances up the best for me. He does run uphill. He's one that is really neat in his shoulder and his chest. I think when you study him from a silhouette standpoint, he cuts these straightness lines. He's very level and correct out of his hip. He's stout bone. He's big-footed. And then I think offers enough muscle and shape. He's certainly not as opened up and as powerful as that red goat, but I think one that offers enough. And so I think there's a little bit of give and take here for me in our lightweight class. But for me, the one that suits me, I think the one that's just a little more complete in his build with enough shape and enough power to go with it, that's tag number 2959 out of our class 9 will be our champion. And then tag number 2945 out of class 8 will be our reserve champion. In our middleweight drive of our FFA show here in our Market Goats, tag number 2849 is going to win our Class 10, or the first class out of this division. Just a really neat balanced goat, and I love the look from the side. I love how angular he is up through his front end, and as flat he is in his blade. One that is extra long bodied and still has some substance as he goes to the ground. A weather that maybe not as pulled apart as some of the other ones that was in that class, but I think he's the most complete. I think he's one that's really sound and functional, and I love that look that he gives you from the side. Out of class 11, the heavier class of the division, tag number 2447 was our class winner. He's a little different than the other class winner. He's a little more moderate in his frame. Maybe not quite as extended as that previous class winner, but I think he's got the same kind of feet and legs. I think he's one that's stout in terms of his substance. That one's advantage to me over the other class winner, though, where he gives up in length and he gives up in extension and maybe some elevation there at the point of his shoulders. That one's really bowed open to the center of his body. I love the width through his chest floor. I like the curvature to the center of his skeleton, and the width down to the roundness and the width through his forerib. And then when you study that one up high, he's got a tremendous amount of shape and muscle packed onto that skeleton. I think another situation where you have to decide is one balanced good and has enough to him, or is one that's another very muscular one that's good enough in his balance. In this class, in the division, I'm going to opt to use the one I think that's got more to him, more power, more product, and I think in a plenty acceptable package in terms of balance. So our tag number 2447 is going to be our champion in this division, and then tag number 2849 is going to be reserve champion in our middleweights of the FFA. Heavyweight division of our FFA show, coming out of class 12, was tag number 2970. Here's the one that I think is extra good in terms of his balance and his attractiveness, and one that's just really striking in terms of his appeal. You study that one from the ground up, and he's got some foot size and some bone underneath him. One that is extra good in terms of length of body, and he's still level and correct there. And then one that packs plenty of muscle and power on top of that. When he goes onto the travel, that one holds himself together well and still maintains that look and balance. Coming out of class 13 was goat number 2848. I think another class maybe that we had earlier today talked about that one that's a little different, a lot of contrasting types. I think of this one again sorted up because he's the product-oriented one. He's the one that's the boldest to the center of his body, and he maintains that advantage in terms of just base width and sheer mass and power and production. You know, that one is he need to be better in his skeleton in terms of his look? Yes, he's a little bit coarser, a little rounder in his shoulder blade, and a little rounder out of his hip. And I think that one probably carries as much condition as you ideally want. But I think a very good goat in his own right. So in this division, I thought that, in my opinion, there was a very easy winner in our champion, and that's the goat that comes out of class 12, tag number 2970. We brought our second place in to look at this one in comparison to our last class winner for a reserve champion, and that second place goat was tagged number 2958. I think that goat really matches in terms of his balance and his look, one that's still square and symmetrical in his design. Probably not as attractive up through the front 1/3 of his skeleton, maybe as we see our class winner. I don't think he's quite as bold to the center of his rib as we see our class winner, but I still think he maintains an advantage of the two that's remaining in selection for reserve in terms of his balance and his look. And so for reserve in our heavyweight FFA, it's tag number 2958. And our overall champion for our FFA division, I think we have a good set of division winners or champions and reserves. And as we've seen in the 4-H show, I think that they're all built good in terms of their balance, and they're fundamentally sound. And we put as much muscle and product on them as we can. And I think that I'm very pleased with what we have. And I think with that being said, I thought that there was a pair of them out here that just kind of sorted out in my mind. I think that they're really good in terms of their attractiveness. They cut out an extra good silhouette. They balance well. They're stout at the ground. They offer plenty of shape and plenty of muscle to go with it. I think it's a good pair that was close in division, and I'm going to keep them together as well. Our grand champion in our FFA division is going to come out of our heavyweight division. That's tag number 2970. And the reserve grand champion is also going to come out of our heavyweight division. That's tag number 2958. I'm the agriculture education instructor at Newcastle High School in Newcastle, Oklahoma. It's certainly been an honor and a privilege to be asked again to evaluate your market goats at the Kern County Fair. Last year when I left Bakersfield, I told myself that if I ever had the opportunity to come back, I would, because I thoroughly enjoyed it. From the show staff to the people involved, and most importantly, the exhibitors. You made it a fun and a great experience for me, and my hat's off to you. I think that you have something special here in your county, and the drive and the competitive edge that your exhibitors put forth are second to none, and so you should be very, very proud of that. And so, again, I appreciate the opportunity. It's been my honor and my privilege. And so I know how most of you are disappointed that, things have turned out the way the world is right now. And you would certainly like to be there in person, and you're disappointed because of that. I can tell you there's some disappointment in this judge's eyes as well, because I'd love to be there with you. As we look at our grand and reserve grand champions out of our 4-H and our FFA division, it's been a phenomenal show, and I would venture to say that videos probably don't do them justice. I would gather that if I were to see them in person, I would probably be even more impressed. It's been a great show, and so my compliments to you guys. I think when I look at all four of those, the grands and reserve of each show, they just balance extremely well. They're fault-free. They're complete. They're good on their feet and legs. They're wedged up front. They're good in their lines. And we put as much muscle and product on them as possible. And so I think they're complete, but these four individuals are also unique, the way they're built and the way they're put together. And so I think with that said, there's one out here that's just extra special in terms of his uniqueness, and one that balances extremely well, but just opens up with tremendous amount of power and product, and he's great on his feet and legs. Our champion overall, congratulations to the exhibitor of tag number 2618, our champion on our 4-H show. That one's going to be our grand champion overall. For reserve, we bring and we look at these remaining three, and I think that there's one out that's really good in terms of his look and his eye peel and his extension. One that's extra long body and still holds himself together. He's great when he goes in motion. Just another unique individual. This maybe not a spitting image of our champion, but I think he's a good one in his own right, and we have to appreciate that. Our reserve grand overall is our champion in our FFA show, tag number 2970. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to do this. Good luck in the future, and keep fighting.